Thank you so much, Dr. Najafian, for this insightful talk. And we already have a couple of audiences in chat. They are very interested to share comments and their questions with you. That's why I do not want to take your time a lot. I just ask Dominique, because in chat already mentioned that he has an article about this.
We have a great article. Yes.
Yeah, that's why he has some comments and questions from you. And then the rest of the audience says, if you have a question, you can raise your hand, or even in chat mention that you want to talk and have question. Dominique, would you please share your comments or question with Dr. Najafian?
I apologize if my video is not on. I believe I trust you can hear my voice. Thank you so much for your presentation. I apologize for having made a reference, a very inelegant reference to my article, but I'm very passionate about this topic, and I think that this is something that needs to be discussed more and more. I'm so glad that you presented this material with us today. My article is not an excellent article; it's a juvenile article that I published many years ago, and now I have students who are working on Jahan as well, and I think we should share info and create reading groups and discuss this more and more. I had a couple of comments and questions about the way you present these three poets, especially Mahsati, and I refer mostly to what the British scholar François de Blois published in his history of Persian literature in a lengthy paragraph in which he analyzes all the primary sources, mainly manuscripts, in which poems by Mahsati or attributed to Mahsati are found. He floats the idea that maybe we are witnessing a kind of pseudo-Khayyam kind of story that in which historical evidence bleeds into myth and the construction of a historical romance character. So Mahsati as a character, as a fictional character that who was then represented more and more, especially during the early Timurid period. This is also very interesting, and I'm glad that you pointed out that the idea of considering the role of women poets during the Timurid period was extremely important as a transition, more than previous dynasties. So I was wondering whether you've been thinking about it, whether it's something that comes across in the poems that you've been analyzing. How shall we work critically on this difference between what is historical evidence and narrations that were produced by men at the same time, just the way that Turandot, right, narrated by Nizami doesn't really correspond necessarily to historical truth, but there is this idea. So this is one thing, and I'm curious because you've been translating these poems so beautifully, and it's interesting to see what you think about it. And then for Jahan, you said that it is true that she does rely on same stock imagery as other poets, and Dominic Brookshire has an excellent book about this, and that he shows very well how different similar imagery is shared by the same poets acting in the same court in Shiraz during the second half of the 14th century. I've read Jahan's Divan at least 2 or 3 times when I was a student. Actually, when I was a student in Naples, I taught myself classical Persian by reading Jahan, and I don't really see technical vocabulary that relates to Irfan. This is the main difference, which is very interesting. But at the same time, she does say in her introduction, in her Dibache, she says, this metaphors, majaz is a pantara, is a bridge towards haqiqat.
Right.
So it's interesting that it really helps us reconsider completely the different levels of reading of a text. The text is not intrinsically mystical or non-mystical only because of the vocabulary that it contains, or the lack thereof, right? So it's fascinating that you have this question. That's it. And then in my article, I try to show that Jahan plays a lot with gender. So she introduced herself as a woman in the introduction, and then she she co-opts somehow the same-sex homoerotic male-to-male kind of desire that belongs to tradition. At the same point, I try to show how Jahan in the tradition is used as as feminine connotations, the world as a beautiful woman that appears. So I was wondering whether it's something that you've been considering, or you have a personal critique or approach to this. Sorry for the length of mine, but thank you. This is very exciting. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all these wonderful comments. And I should say your article really made me think about Jahan. So thank you for writing that. And I look forward to seeing new developments. But yes, Mahsati and Omar, that's something that I really, really need to work more on. And as a terrible, terrible historian, this is going to horrify the historians in the room, and I apologize for that. But I'm more interested exactly in the stories rather than the original history. The fact that we have this narration about certain figures is telling us something about the social context, why we are building such understanding. And again, what Nizami is saying about all the characters that he has, maybe we should look at the constructions of gender in those romances that deal with the heteronormative love, just to see what was the quote-unquote norm of the time. I can talk more about Jahan. And going back to what you said, yes, I was somewhat arguing against Dominic's and your argument that, yes, we cannot really, and I completely agree with you, that we do not see any technical, mystical terms or really the subtlety of the language of someone like Hafez, whom still we cannot decide, was it mystical, was it not mystical, how should we read it? And I also look at world, and so what I really like about your article is that you play with the pen name and her name as well. My play with the name, and I have argued it somewhere else, that by going against that metaphor of world as this whorish old woman, she is bringing not just herself, but this other way of understanding the world. And that's where I read the mysticism in it. But again, I don't know. I mean, I know that I am imprisoned in my time and understanding as well. Yes, she's talking more about her body, but does it show that she's more worldly, or does it show a feminine type of piety or understanding of the mystical? So I wish I had better answers for you, but I'm trying to read the mystical in her works. And again, I might be, unfortunately, I haven't had the chance to read her divan 3 or 4 times. Hopefully I will. But yeah, for now, I'm pushing the idea mainly because of her dibache, that maybe we should look for the mystical in her work as well. But again, it's quite possible that she's just saying that to tell her critics like Obaid that leave me alone, I'm doing something very, very serious.
Okay, thank you. Roxana, you have a question.
Yes. Well, let me congratulate you. It's really very refreshing, and I'm very impressed by the material you've presented, and I want to thank you and the organizers first and foremost. But I think perhaps we don't have question because we are so overwhelmed by depth and breadth of the material presented. I am a sociologist by background, but so I don't really have a great deal to contribute to the topic, but I can say that I have been reading a lot about in poetry and history, And I think that it's very regrettable that there is so little writing and books. Given the fact that contemporary Iranian women book are so successful, why these women are completely forgotten. And I think that I also have a potential response, and perhaps we need to think of women as agents and how they're historically, I mean, Mahsati, for example, to imagine that so many centuries ago, a woman wrote in such powerfully feminine poetry. Well, I'm babbling, I guess. I'll just give it back to you, and I'm very impressed by what you've presented. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Bahram-Mitash. I teach all your texts. I force my students to read your work too. Thank you.
Michelle John?
Yes.
Sorry.
I mean, it's more to do with, again, my own, trying to apply that to my own background. Very rightly, my husband, who's sitting here and listening to the lecture as well, pointed out that we have the same question that you just brought up, the side-by-side thing, about female composers. So we always say, you know, can you listen to a piece and say if it's composed by a woman or by, you know, by female or male? It's I don't know. I mean, it's a very good exercise. It's very naughty, but it is really good exercise. And another thing I wanted to add is that currently, and that would be something I would very much like to take on outside of this discussion with you. Currently, I'm working on a set of a concert program of setting of Hafiz ghazals by Western composers, so by Brahms, you know, 19th century and 20th century composers. And it's very interesting to see that, you know, despite the neutrality of the male-female in Persian language, all of them, of course, they are through translations, but this is always the sound of a lover, a male lover who is saying the beauties of the female lover. You know, so it's almost naive in the way that it is done. So it was interesting that you mentioned whether we can hear any female voice in Hafiz because of the points that you made. Is it something that you think that translators and adapters, you know, because a lot of these translations of 19th century were adaptation, right, and translation. So is it something that kind of is imposed by translator, you know, to look at it as a male lover, or you think that it's something, you know, deep inside that?
Mm-hmm. So thank you so much for that question. Yes, the heteronormativity was forced on all these poems with modernity, because again, pre-modernity, same-sex relations were there happening. And it's interesting, if we look at the travelogues of European travelers before 18th century, it is, ooh, these backward Muslims are all homosexuals. And then now the discourse is, ooh, all these backward Muslims kill homosexuals. So modernity had that influence on that heteronormativity. When I learned these materials, I told my parents, they fell in love because of Hafiz. And I told them, did you know that he was writing for a male beloved? And my dad was, what? No.
It's a bit like Shakespeare, yeah. Like, you know, Shakespeare's sonnets nowadays, we only think of them that are for male, and for many years they were only for for women.
Absolutely, so. And again, the Victorian mentality. So I mentioned the obscene in Rumi, and where oh yes, Professor is here, who has written the wonderful book Rumi and the Hermeneutics of Eroticism. Is it Nicholson who chooses to translate those obscene parts in Latin? And his theory is that Rumi was going senile near the end of his life, so he was writing all these obscene things. But again, I'm reading Attar, Sanai, Rumi, and they're using it so freely. And that's why, again, in Mahsati, my question is, was it really the norm, or she is doing something that is extraordinary?
So much.
Of course.
Okay, thank you. Mary, you have a question in chat. Would you please ask your question from Dr. Najafian?
Hello? Hello? Can you hear me, Dr. Najafian?
Yes, yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Nice to meet you. Thank you so much for this lecture. It was really very interesting. We have right now in our compendium, yes, we have Ganjavi as one of the poets. So it was very interesting and relevant for me to hear more about her from an accomplished scholar such as yourself. The question I had in the chat was, I mean, it was a very nice title that you have for your presentation, the pre-modern Persian princesses. I'm just wondering, you know, you're talking about the pre-modern versus the modern period. If we're trying to classify these poets, do you think there is a useful way that we could classify these three poets or some of these poets, for example, Ganjavi?
Ooh. Again, I'm a terrible person to talk about classification. My mind is too chaotic. I'm an anarchist. But again, these three poets come from such different backgrounds themselves. And if we accept that Mahsati was the musician in the court, we can just imagine the potentials that it will give us that all these poems were sung in courts. And then because of that, maybe she was not an elite woman. And then if we juxtapose this with Arab women poets who were mostly of baser classes, and it was just with the power of poetry that poetry for them was a social capital. But it seems from what we read from the poets about the women poets, that was not the case in Iran. With Padshah Khatun, again, this creates, and this is where Ayatollah Khomeini's poems come into the picture. Any gentleman or gentlewoman who could read and write would compose poetry. So again, Padshah Khatun, is she expressing her subjectivity, or is it just the expression of I'm a monarch, and like every good monarch, I'm going to write some poems? And then with Jahan, I think Dominic Brookshaw makes the claim that we might treat it as the Mongol influence, that the women had more agency, and that's what the Turkic tribes were bringing to Iran. That's why they would write. But Jahan herself is also an elite woman. And it seems that she was a patron of the arts as well. She had these debates going on, whether at her house or somewhere else. So again, categorizing them anything other than classical. And the reason that I'm using classical or pre-modern is, again, how to talk about the subjectivities of these women, while our understanding of male and female subjectivities are such that, again, bound to the constructions of, for example, if we compare Furugh to Parvin Etesami to a little bit before that, of course they're having different subjectivities. But again, I'm not imaginative enough to think what was that or how to think about it.
Be a pattern.
Of course.
Okay, thank you. Any other question, comment from Dr. Najafian? Okay, I don't see any hands raised or chat. Oh yeah, Mir-Djalali, would you please? Dr. Babadi.
I'm not a doctor. Thank you very much. So I love
that. To be.
You are a doctor, yes. And I really enjoyed the talk. Thank you very much, truly. Just a question of curiosity. You mentioned Edward Brown and the adjective or the noun gay for Mahsati, if I got it correctly. I was just curious. I don't have the context. So does he refer to Mahsati as joyful and happy and playful, the way, for instance, Nietzsche another sort of writer in the Victorian time uses gay science.
Right.
For a lot of, I think of classical Hollywood films, a lot of musicals, people refer to themselves as I'm so gay, meaning I'm so joyful and happy. Or is it a connotation of homosexuality? Just
I don't read it as connotations of homosexuality, but it is joyful. But I feel there's a sense of insult as well, because he says not to be too harsh, but it seems that she had a gay disposition. So, and again, she when he's talking about the exchange with Amir Ahmad, says, they're taking it too far. Again, like a good Victorian gentleman, he is insulted by whatever that is happening there. But yeah, no, I don't think he means gay in the homosexual sense.
But it's a mockery, you think?
I think so. That's how and it is in his literary history of Persia. So, yeah.
Thanks very much.
Of course.
Domenico has a comment about Mehrdad's points about gay. Domenico, would you please share with all audiences? Thank you.
Or it's just sorry. It was just a very superficial comment to respond to that. Of course, gay in the Victorian context refers to, it was used when talking about women, was a sexist euphemism, synonym with easy woman, easy style, something that is not as profound as what male counterparts would produce. This was unfortunately the prejudice that would come with gay.
Thank you so much. Thanks for sharing with all of us. Again, Dr. Ruxana.
Thank you very much. I'm so pleased I get a chance to ask something. Would you please tell us what's your next project? What's your book? What's your next book? What's your next work?
Oh, I wish I had an answer for that. Again, my mind works in a very, very chaotic way. And the talk I gave a month before this was on 12th Imam in Iran. So my next talk at UPenn is going to be on allegory in Attar. But the projects that I have is my book, 20th Century Readings of Hafez. How is it that the communists, two ayatollahs, and nationalists think of him as the ideal Iranian citizen? I also have a project on allegory in Attar, 12th Imam in Iran, and also a post-tenure project on monsters and religion. So, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, I think that we shouldn't take Dr. Najafian's time a lot. Thank you for this engaging discussion, all audiences, and definitely Dr. Najafian. And I hope that you enjoyed the talk, and thank you for joining us today. I just again appreciate Dr. Najafian, and back to Dr. Asai.
Thank you so much for that. And yes, absolutely. It was a fascinating paper and really, really, absolutely thought-provoking. And I really appreciated all the questions at the end. So thanks, and have a lovely morning, day, evening, night.
I also wanted to thank the organizers, Dr. Asai and Balagani. Thank you so much, and the audience, and the fantastic questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
A pleasure to have you. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Take care.